Nomad Podcast.
There, welcome to the very first episode of the Nomad Podcast. My name is Sean Tierney, and I will be your host. Today, I'm super excited to introduce you to my friend Trevor Gerhardt. So Trevor is on his fourth lap around the world, having traveled to 44 countries in the last 3 years. But he wasn't always a digital nomad. In 2015, Trevor was living in Washington, D.C., feeling the itch to change something about his life. He had recently seen a post on Reddit proposing an audacious experiment that would involve gathering a group of 75 strangers who would take their jobs on the road and do a working trip around the world together. Trevor took a leap of faith and mailed in his $3,000 deposit check to an entity that didn't yet exist, hopped on a flight to Prague, and embarked on what would become the single most transformative journey of his lifetime. So 44 countries and 3 years later, Trevor is still on the road exploring the world one country at a time, performing his job that he started with. And in this, the first podcast episode, we are going to talk to Trevor and hear him share stories about his trips abroad, insights about how he's been able to stay successful, packing tips, gear recommendations, fitness advice, tons of different insights that are going to be very useful to anyone considering this lifestyle. So buckle up. This episode is packed with useful advice from someone who has been there and done it successfully. So without further ado, here is my interview with Trevor. Nomad Podcast is supported in part by Nomad Prep, an online academy that teaches you everything you need to know to take your job on the road and crush it abroad. Enroll today at nomadprep.com/podcast and get your first 4 days of training completely free. Nomad Prep, take your job on the road and take on the world. All right. Welcome to Nomad Podcast, episode 1. We are here with Trevor Gerhardt. Trevor, thank you for being the guinea pig and the first guest on today's episode.
Sean, very excited.
Cool.
Let's do this.
Yeah, so let me paint some context for people here and just kind of set this up. So the whole goal of this podcast series, what will be a podcast series, is really to just demystify this art of going nomadic. And you've been on the road now for what, 3 years or something?
Yep, almost 3 years.
3 years. So like my theory is that there's a lot of people that are in corporate jobs, sedentary, in places, and in a rut. I was in a rut before I left and did this, and this has been just absolutely transformative for me going on the road like this, as I think it has been for you. So my whole goal here is really to help those people, like help make this more accessible to those people who must see us as absolute aliens. Like, how do you sell all your stuff? And Trevor, I read your Instagram. You said something like 18 bed changes or 14 bed changes in 2018 so far.
Yeah. I thought I was going to slow down this year, but I guess not. That's like my new metric. Is like how many times I've moved locations, even within a city. If I have to change an apartment. So it's like 14 already this year.
So you're moving at a pace of like, what is that? Like once a week, roughly?
It started off the year real hot with a trip in Vancouver and Whistler and skiing in Japan and all over. Yeah. So, but now it's slowed down. So it's only like every 2 weeks,
which is still crazy. Like we must look like aliens to that person in the sedentary corporate job. Like, how do you do this? So really the whole goal here is to just like demystify this, to make it more accessible. And I think the best way to do that is through just having a conversation with someone like yourself who's done this and been successful at it. So cool. So that's the backdrop. Trevor, I'll let you let's start this. Like, how did we meet each other? I'll let you kind of tell the story because it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So I guess this goes back to last June. We were both in Central America, traveling through Central America, and I was hanging out with Andrew Cohen, and you were in Nicaragua or coming to Nicaragua. I was already in Nicaragua. And I think we were connected first because we both knew Cohen and we knew you were coming. Cohen had already left. And so he put you in touch. But right at the same time, I had put out a kind of like a post to the Citizens channel, which is the people that have finished remote year, seeing if anyone wanted to join me in Lisbon for the month of August. And you were one of the first people to reach out. And so like right around the time that we started chatting about the house, you got to Nicaragua in San Juan del Sur, like maybe a few days after that, a week after that. So it was pretty perfect timing to like meet and hit it off there.
Yeah.
Am I getting that correct? That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
That'll
that's
work.
absolutely right. I was in Playa Grande, Costa Rica at a surf camp.
That's okay.
And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, you had thrown out on Slack. And then so I connected and then Aristia and we kind of gelled like the three roomies. And then
Hmm.
literally like a couple days later, Cohen made that connection and he's like, oh, there's some
Yeah.
OGs. You should drive up. It's 2 hours away. You should just go to San Juan del Sur. So
Yeah.
that was pretty cool.
Yeah. It was funny, like the timing of like we're both in the same part of the world and we're connecting because we're both going to want to go to Lisbon at the same time. It's just that those type of things happen all the time now.
Yeah, well, and there's so much commonality, like the kite surfing and Tim Ferriss. Like I feel like we very much fitness, like very much run in the same kind of vein in a lot
Yeah.
of ways.
Yeah.
All right,
Definitely.
so you were part of the original remote year group. They call them the OGs.
Yeah.
Talk to me, when did you leave? Talk to me about like the circumstances of how that came to happen.
Sure. So we're called the OGs because we were actually just nameless. They started this naming process of naming the groups after explorers or like things around the world after we existed because we were just we were remote year at the time,
Right.
which is funny to think about now because remember we were so much bigger than just one group of people or one trip. It's a whole thing. But so when I found out about remote year, I mean this was in 2015 or maybe even the end of 2014. And I found out about it through one of like the tech blogs, either TechCrunch or Y Combinator's, Hacker News, or maybe even Reddit. Just a post about it was basically like a one-page website saying, I'm going to take this trip around the world. We're going to do this as a group. 12 cities, 12 months. It had like the idea out there, but it didn't have any way to like pay. There was no evidence of it happening. There was no like. It was unclear who the team was, but it was just like, if you're interested in that kind of idea, submit your email address here. So I did that along with, I think, around 25,000 other people. It was a very, new idea at the time. I don't think any kind of traveling group like this existed back then. And a few months later, so I was living in Washington, D.C., and it was the middle of winter. And a few months later, I get like a follow-up email, give me January 2015 time, beginning of February. It's like, all right, this is actually happening. This idea you signed up to hear more about is now happening. And so I submitted a form then that was more detailed information about myself, my work, which at the time I'd been working for Conveil, which is the company I currently work for, which is a software consultancy that specializes in public transport. So we build web applications to help people design changes to public transit systems. And so I've been working there for a year and a half. I was pretty settled into DC. I'd been living in DC for about 2.5 years at that point. And it was kind of like, I had like a trust with my company, which was nice. I was able to work from home if I needed to, or work from, my parents' house if I was visiting them, or if I went across the country to San Francisco for a week, I could work there too. But after I submitted the form, with more detailed information for me, I got an email maybe a week later asking to set up an interview time. And so at that time, maybe I set it up for a couple of days later, and I was interviewed with the current CEO of the company and one of the founders, Greg Kaplan. I think he's too busy to do individual interviews anymore for people that want to go on the trip. They have a whole team for that now.
Yeah, there's like layers of people now that handle all that.
Yeah. It's very amusing to think that Greg, the head of a 150 person company, was doing those interviews back then. Who's a great guy, and he has so much energy and excitement about this whole thing. You could just feel it through the video chat. So Greg was asking about travel stories that I might have had, things that I had done, like trip-wise outside the country. And at that point, it was pretty minimal. There was basically 3 trips that I'd made outside the country for 2 weeks at a time, and that was it. That was the extent of my travel experience. So while I had like the ability to travel, like I could work remotely because I worked for a company that allowed it to work. You could work from home. I worked at a job as a software engineer developer that it's relatively easy to do, work asynchronously. So I could work on my own hours and then talk to my colleagues when they were online. But I'd never really given a thought to doing it myself. I'd learned all about this stuff. I'd heard about this stuff, but I'd never actually gone through the process of saying, I can do this, I will do this, I'm going to go travel the world on my own. So it was really interesting and great to have this impetus come along at this time when I was both, financially secure, had a job that was stable, and also kind of in a place where I didn't see myself being in DC for much longer, but I didn't know where I wanted to go. I liked my job, so I was going to stay there because it seemed like a good place to be for my job, but even though I didn't need to be there. So it was kind of a perfect storm of things happening in my life at the time. And after my conversation with Greg, I found out maybe a week later that I'd gotten into the program, and that was in February of 2015. Might have been the first week of March around that time. And the program started in the first week of June of 2015, so a few months later.
Yeah, because you guys so my program started in May of 2016, and you guys were basically just at the tail end of your year.
Yep.
Do you think you would have done it had remote year not existed? Like you said, you're perfectly capable of doing it, but it was like this was the catalyst that made you actually pull the trigger and go for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to think about like the capability of what I was able to do versus would I have done it, because I had worked from home so many times. I had worked from across the country where none of my colleagues were. I could have done it, and I knew about it. I had read the 4-hour work week, and heard about that those techniques for optimizing work while you're traveling. I'd read Vagabonding by Rolf Potts, another great book about just exploring and seeing the world in a different way, and not really and just thinking about travel differently, and not thinking about it as a 2-week vacation, like thinking about it as like a continuous thing that you can do. And I think just like the safety of like the friends I had at home, the group of friends you build up, your community that you have, just that was like a soft barrier that I just never got through on my own. And so I'd imagine at some point that if some of my other friends had maybe taken the leap, I might have taken the leap. But at that time, I was the first out of my friend group to do anything like this. So now, I would say most of my friends are digital nomads, traveling and working. At least most of my, friends that I've made in the past couple of years. I still have a whole ton of friends that aren't back home. But
so you get this acceptance letter from Greg, and you've already had a positive interview with him. And at what point, you're weighing the pros and cons. You're like, I've got this soft barrier of friends at home, but I think I can do this. And at some point, you just made the decision. You went for it. But how sketchy is that? Like, Remote Year wasn't a company at that point. Like, you're sending a check to some entity that you've never seen. Like, how was that a sketchy thing, or what?
It was. So I remember having conversations like this with my friends, because the first thing we had to do is send a multi-$1,000 down payment down for the year. And so Remote Year costs $27,000 per year. So it's $2,000 per month, and they make you pay $3,000 up front. And that's how it was for us. I think they might have changed it slightly, but I still think it's $27,000 total for the year. And so, at the time I'd met the CEO, who's a guy exactly my age, from Chicago. I had met one other employee. I just chatted with our program leader at the time, and I was talking to friends and my colleagues, my boss about it. And they look at the website. It's like a Squarespace site that you can set up in 5 minutes. If you type some copy out, anyone could have done it. And I'm sending a $3,000 payment to someone, maybe a month and a half or 2 months ahead of time. It was definitely there were moments where it seemed sketchy. It seemed like I could never see that money again, and it seemed like I could show up in our first destination, which was Prague, and there would be no one there. And you had that, but it was such a small amount of negative feeling there, because the overall excitement of it all, it's completely outweighed it. So once I think it was right around the time when I got the acceptance letter, and I was working through some contract issues with one of our clients, a potential contract with a client. Which I would have been a major part on. I remember walking out of a meeting, or I'd broken my leg in like a month or two before these interviews happened, or about a month before this interview happened with Greg. And so I was in crutches at the time, and I was really kind of miserable in the DC winter. And I remember walking out of this crutching out of this meeting, uh, with my boss Kevin, and realizing, that since this deal fell through, it was kind of like the last thing that I was even thinking about that could have possibly prevented me from doing remote year. And that was when I told him, about remote year and that I was probably going to go on it. And so we had this, we had this like emotional few days working through this potential deal with a client. And since that didn't work out, which was fine in the end, very good in the end. I was like, well, I guess I'm going on remote year, which is it was one of those moments that I'll never forget, like that crazy feeling where like, I'm going to make this leap and it's going to be crazy and it's going to be life changing, but I don't know how crazy and life changing at the time. But it was pretty special time.
So you broke your leg right before you're going on a thing there where you're going to basically be walking every day for a year and all these things.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be scary to be starting out the year that way.
Yeah, it was the dead of DC winter, and I was playing soccer with it was my soccer team at the time. It was a few friends I had from the co-working space from back home, and and it's like sleeting rain. It's like 35 degrees out. It's just above snow. It's so cold. It's nasty. We're playing outdoor soccer, and I'm playing goalie, and I slide to block a ball, break my leg. Someone runs into me, and my friends are just like, "Get up!" They don't believe I have a broken leg. Chase me off the field. Find out the next day. I'm like miserable for the rest of the winter because of this. It's just hard to get around. I'm terrible on crutches. I never had them before, and that was a huge thing, man. I was going into that was beginning of February. The trip started, and I left DC in May, traveled around the US a little bit, and then was in Prague the first week of June. And in April, like mid-April, I got the cast off. And so I started walking again then. And that was pretty scary. I mean, I was really careful with it for a while too afterwards. And that would have been game changing because I walked. The first day I was in Prague, I was walking minimum 10,000 steps a day, probably close to 5 or 6 miles a day because it's such a beautiful city to walk around in June. And I would not have been able to do, I would have been miserable at least the first month or so if I had a broken leg. I'm such an active person to begin with. So,
yeah, I think you and I both are pretty into fitness, and we actually started our group in Prague as well. I can't imagine. I did the math on my Apple Health meter thing, the steps for the year, and I averaged 4 miles a day walking. So I just cannot imagine going into that with a broken leg and being like, it's already kind of like, who knows what this is going to be? Is there going to be anyone waiting for us at the airport? And then adding that variable to it, that's pretty crazy time.
Yeah, if it to extend the apprehension that we might have had about this down payment and everything. I was the first person to arrive in Prague for our trip. So I arrived maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, and the reason was because I had a stupid layover in London, and so it was, I was flying in Sunday morning to Prague, but I had like a 12 or 16 hour layover in London, so I was flying out of London at like 5 a.m. So I arrived in Prague, first one, and Mark Johnson, a good buddy of mine that you've met also, was the second one to arrive. And so Hannah, program leader, and Greg Kaplan, the founder of Remote Year, were there to meet us. They had signs and everything. It was real cute. Took pictures. It was exciting. And they put us into a cab when Mark showed up, like maybe half an hour, 45 minutes after I did. And the first thing we asked each other was, so is this real? Like, did they just take our money? Are we never going to see them again? Are we the only people here? Do we just lose? At that point, I think we had made the second payment already. Because it's the first day of the first month. So I think we'd both put down $5,000 already. And did they just take us for $10,000 and this cab's going to drop us off in the middle of Prague? We're not going to know where we are. That was the first conversation we had. And so. There was that tiny bit of skepticism. It's almost like it was too good to be true. So
yeah. That would have been a pretty ballsy. I feel like taking your 3,000 would have been a safer way to scam you guys if that was going to happen. But I can imagine at that point. Yeah. So what was y'all's route? You started in Prague and you did the 12 cities, 12 months. What was the route for you guys?
Mm-hmm. So we started in Europe. We did 4 months of Europe. We did Prague in the Czech Republic. Then went to Ljubljana in Slovenia, and that's a small town or small city, probably about 300,000 people. It's beautiful in July. It's also really hot in July. And then we went to Savtat in Croatia. Savtat's just south of Dubrovnik. Beautiful beach town, very sleepy, but we had just a great setup for us. You just walk along the water on your way to work in the morning. You have all the sailboats in the harbor that you pass by, little peninsulas to swim in, little beach restaurants. It was beautiful. And then we went from that little tiny sleepy beach town to Istanbul, Turkey. The city of about 18 million or 20 million people or so. Hustle and bustle. It's quite a transition. From there, the group flew to Penang, Malaysia, and I caught up with them after a few weeks. I had to go back to the States for a wedding and other things, and which was actually my second wedding of the year already. Weddings are
the thing that always brings everyone back.
Yeah, I've returned for I think 5 or 6 now. It's just loop back through 4. And then we went from Penang, Malaysia. We went to Koh Phangan, Thailand, and then to Hanoi, Vietnam, then to Kyoto in Japan. And it was a great dynamic of places within Southeast Asia. Penang, it's a tropical island, but a little bit bigger, more populated. Koh Phangan's a tiny little island known for its partying, but when the full moon isn't happening, the island's really quiet. There's lots of yoga there, lots of meditation retreats. It's really jungly. It's nice. And then Hanoi, another big city. The amount of motorbikes you'll see there, the flows they're like waterways. I mean, they're continuous and they go everywhere. It's amazing. And then we're in Kyoto, a great Japanese city, mid-sized. It has like the feel of what you kind of expect of Japan. It has a lot of these old temples mixed with this modern infrastructure, and it's very respectful of Japanese people, not crossing the street when the light says it's red, even if it's the middle of the night and there's no cars. But from there, we flew to Buenos Aires, which is just about the opposite side of the world. So you're in Kyoto, Japan, Buenos Aires, Argentina, South America. That was a insane flight. I would never recommend it. From Buenos Aires, we went to Montevideo in Uruguay, then to Santiago, Chile, and then we ended in Lima, Peru. And so that was a year, 4 months in Europe, 4 months in Southeast Asia, and 4 months in South America.
And that ended in June of 2016?
Yep.
Yeah. And so, but since then, you still kept it going. This is your life now, right?
Yeah. So like when I do like the bed count, how many times I've like moved my belongings and have a new bed to sleep in. That year was pretty. It wasn't minimal, but since I was only moving every month, I usually stayed there mostly. For the most part, I'd have like a weekend trip elsewhere, but I wasn't technically uprooting. I had like a home base for the month, so it was a little bit different. I could leave my belongings behind, and since then I've kind of optimize for both like the nightly stays, because if you're going to take a 4-day weekend somewhere, you don't want to pay for a place you're not staying, and then just kind of kept moving forward along with that. So I've ended up moving. I think last year was in 2017 was something like 78 different places I stayed in, but that was there were multiple trips where I was just doing a night or two here, a night or two there. Road tripping through Ireland when I was in Canada, and checking out Central America.
I won't even ask you how many countries you've been to. I think you're like at a different level of nomad. Like, how many times have you been around the world? I think is maybe a better question.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, it's like zigzagging back and forth. I think I'm on my fourth time around, I want to say, since remote year started. So yeah.
Fourth time around this rock that we're on. That's pretty impressive. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, how did your job, so you had that conversation with your employer, you're now, traveling. How did things change, if at all? Like, were you able to deliver on that promise of, hey, nothing will change here, we can do this? Or like, how did you guys stay in touch? How did you keep on the same page throughout that whole process?
Yeah. I mean, luckily we were a distributed company to begin with. We have employees in the East Coast of the United States, a couple different cities. One of the founding partners of the company was living in Paris at the time, and he now lives in Singapore. For a while, he lived in Hong Kong. So me traveling was definitely, it's different than what everyone else is doing at my company, but it wasn't, it wasn't like we were all sitting in the same office every day. So that was a huge help for the transition into that. And I definitely spent the first month and maybe 2, 3 months, like extra dedicated, working extra hours, making sure that there was nothing that was going to slip, and definitely trying to cater more to the regular schedule. So make sure that like nothing changed at first. And then, then you're in cities with majorly different time zones, and you're, everyone's more comfortable with the situation. So we started to reevaluate what was going on, what would be best like going forward. And at the time we were 6 employees. We're now 8. We're not growing crazy fast or anything, but we have continuous business, new clients. So things were changing anyways. And so I kind of moved into a more specialized role. At the time, I was working mainly when I was in DC. I was working mainly with one client, and mainly working on the products associated with that client. And afterwards, when I started to transition away from that into being on multiple projects and working on more specific parts of the code base that I would work on than before. Instead of doing everything, instead of working with the client to see their needs, I was mainly the step behind everyone else who would interface with the client and figure out, and I would, they would figure out exactly what we need, or I'd sit in on some meetings, but not all of them. And then I would be able to work more on my hours and deliver whenever they needed it, than need to be on the client meetings and doing the direct consulting that I used to do.
So I would imagine, so if you're not client facing, I would guess that makes it a lot easier to do this type of thing in terms of like what Wi-Fi you need. If you're checking code into a Git repository, you can have very spotty connections, versus if you got to be on a call with a client, you can't have the Wi-Fi going in and out.
Exactly. I don't have to ever be the only person on client calls anymore. Sometimes I sit on them. So, usually I'll just be taking questions for whatever I've been working on specifically. And even then, I usually know ahead of time, or can even talk with some of our clients on Slack. We have Slack support channels for some of our bigger clients. And so that's worked out a lot. And I've even had some meetings with clients directly in person since Doug left. I was in Paris with my colleague who was living there at the time, and we met some of our clients. I was in Bogota, Colombia, and we met a potential client, or I met a potential client down there, and was able to still get this client interfacing in, even though that wasn't what I was doing at the time. But it was, as an 8-person company, we all don't need to be talking to the clients all the time anyways. I mean, it's good to definitely have everyone exposed to it. You don't want to be completely insulated from your client. But it kind of worked out that I could fit into a more specialized role. Yep.
Got it. And so communication wise, so Slack, and then occasional video calls. And then do you guys do like any type of periodic, like everyone comes together in one place? I think you had a trip like that, if I remember.
Yeah. So we do a week-long trip every year, like a retreat. We've done 4 now, and we'll do our 5th this year. And our first international one was, well, the first one was when I was on, or the second one was when I was on remote year. So it was the fall of remote year of 2015. We were in Istanbul, and I flew back for a wedding, and then I went on a work retreat for a week. So that was a good check-in, because I'd been on the road for 4 months at that point, and it was good to see the team who I'd been seeing more regularly in the past, and that was in upstate New York. And then we started doing international trips after that. So we did one in Montreal a year later, and last year we did one in Lisbon, and those are extremely valuable. I mean, getting not just any time in. I see some colleagues here and there anyways, and you can hang out and have your dinner, but getting like a good chunk of time in together where you're doing a lot of long-term brainstorming activities and deep dives about what the company should be doing, anything we want to change. Those are extremely valuable trips to do, and especially as a distributed team. We have a lot of we talk a lot every day anyways via Slack and on video calls, but it's not that you lose something, but I think you just the time together is, you're just not going to have that when you're on a video call. Like, we're not just going to sit here for 8 hours on a video call together.
Right.
But you'll if you have a planned meeting day in, while you're on a work retreat, 8 hours together, if you plan on that, then it'll be game changing. You have a lot more deeper you get into things.
I can definitely like echo your sentiments that the value of these in-person meetings. Pagely, the company that I work for, we do the same thing. It's like Slack is kind of all pervasive communication. Then we do a weekly stand-up via Zoom, and then twice a year we'll get together in person somewhere. And typically been US. I'm hoping they'll consider Lisbon. That would make it very convenient for me at some point. But cool. Well, let's shift gears here a little bit. I'm going to go kind of Tim Ferriss on you. I've got some questions that I want to ask. So fitness wise, like you're big into it. I'm big into it. What's your routine? Like how do you stay in shape? I know CrossFit is your thing, but like talk a little bit about what are you into?
Yeah. I mean, I love a wide variety of things. I mean, mostly I like to stay active. So what I used to do a lot of was running, and I would most nice, good like European cities and a lot of South American cities have good places to run in. Southeast Asia, you run into a lot of problems when you're running. The kind of shared avenues in the road are just really too harrowing for me. And so when I started remote year, I was big into running. Well, I had a broken leg, so I was like slowly getting back into running. But really, that was kind of my focus at the time. And when I got to Southeast Asia, I like tried to go for a run, and I completely hated it. And so I decided like that was not for me anymore, and I had to kind of reevaluate what I was going to do for like a daily active routine, or multi-time week routine. So I got back into weightlifting, which is something I dabbled in the past, but it's not as when you're doing it with friends, it's not as much fun. And that's kind of why I'd given it up. And so, that's kind of how I like fell into CrossFit. It's just this great, like you're working out with other people, you're challenging each other. I love the intensity that it brings in like an hour's worth of time. Really something you do like 3 times a week, 2 times a week, and really get a really good workout in. And it's really important to like get those high quality workouts in when you can on the road, because a lot of your life is going to be inconsistent anyways. But I do like maybe once a month, once every couple months, I like to go on a pretty intense hike. Usually when I'd get to a new location or in a new part of the world, I Google things like what's the tallest mountain in this country, and then see if it's worth doing, or like what's the tallest point in the city to jog up to. And so me and Mark Johnson would regularly do that. We just find a hill, the tallest point in the city, and just run up it. And if we can, how far we can make it. A few times we chose hills that were bigger than we could manage, and then and definitely do like some serious hikes in between, climb some volcanoes, do some smaller mountains where nothing too technical, but that's definitely a big part of what I've been doing, finding mountains to climb. And then on the side, I mean, it's good to find things that you have fun doing that are also active. Surfing, I picked up when I was in Montevideo, Uruguay, was the first lesson I had taken. I'd been on a surfboard before in various places, but never had really tried to surf, but when I was much younger. And so, I mean, that's a really good workout for upper body and just a great active sport to do. Then when we were on remote year, a lot of us played soccer. So we would try to do pickup games a couple times a month. Also a great thing to do. And man, when I'm in a big city, I walk as much as possible. If something says it's a 30-minute walk, 40-minute walk, that's usually all right with me. And as long as it's not like too hot out, and especially if it's a good walking city. Lisbon is maybe my favorite walking city. I loved walking around Lisbon so much last summer. Buenos Aires is a great walking city. Prague, amazing city to walk around. When cities are that beautiful, if you're by yourself, put your headphones in, listen to a podcast, or an audiobook or something like that, music, just enjoy the street life. Rack up those 10,000 steps a day, no problem.
I just today bought 3 kites, so I haven't had any of the kites. Trevor and I both do kite surfing.
Forgot about that one.
Yeah. Well, and you do regular surfing too, right? You're in Bali now, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well,
currently in Bali.
You definitely have to come back to Lisbon. We need to go kite surfing.
Yeah, man. We talked about it a lot last time. Never made it out there though.
Yeah, I'll be dialed in by the time you get here, so we'll be able to do it.
Good.
So on the subject of podcasts, so you walk around, stay with the podcast on there. This is another Tim Ferriss question, but like, what do you listen to regularly? You turn me on to the Sam Harris podcast, which is awesome. But are there
Yeah.
any others that you particularly like?
Yeah. So I listened to the Sam Harris Waking Up podcast. I really like that. I mean, not every one of his guests, but I mean, he brings on some incredibly smart people. Tim Ferriss, same thing. Like, not every guest is perfect, but just some of those like minor. I mean, you get these CEOs or people you would never imagine meeting. Just super rich people that just have like these tidbits of advice that are just incredible to hear about. However they've made it in their life. That Tim Ferriss is. I think it's just the Tim Ferriss podcast. And then I've listened to Joe Rogan here and there. That's all right. It's like too long and like
It's crazy.
I get lost in that. Yeah. Sometimes if I like, I'll spin through it and see if there's anything good. For health, there's the Ben Greenfield podcast. He's like Tim Ferriss is a biohacker, sure. Like, compared to Ben Greenfield, he does nothing. This guy, Ben, he's talked about so many things that I just had never come across in my life, are the details that he knows, like the health benefits of, are just insane. So that's the Ben Greenfield podcast. And then I've also picked up the Very Bad Wizards podcast recently. Very Bad Wizards, more the vein of Sam Harris. They talk about philosophy, psychology. They're two professors from the United States, and they get into like really deep subjects of morality, of good and evil, of like the whys, like the deep like why of why we do things, and they're also extremely entertaining and like minorly vulgar. They're just a good duo of podcasters that are entertaining and talk about interesting philosophical stuff.
I love the name, Very Bad Wizards.
Yeah, great name also.
What about like, is there any gear that you can't live without at this point? I know you have those good headphones. Like, what are you using there?
Oh yeah, well, these are the Beats Solo. I mean, I went to wireless headphones, and I can't go back. I used to have a pair of the Bose noise canceling headphones that were amazing, but they were wired. But I know Bose has wireless headphones also. Yeah, I have the AirPods also. So I usually do these when I'm working on my laptop, and AirPods when I'm walking around outside, working out or something. I do. I mean, you can't live without your backpacks.
Yeah.
I use the Manal bags, which are like definitely big digital nomad bags. I don't know if like anyone else in the world knows them, other than like the digital nomad community. They're amazing for travel. They have all these unique features, like being able to hide the straps, the bag, really good, really like high quality laptops. They use padded laptops. They use. And they have a daily carry and a secondary one, which is bigger, which I use as my own. So I have a backpack and then a bigger backpack that's my carry-on. So, but other than like that, that kind of gear, I mean, that typical, can't live without my laptop.
Right.
For packing cubes are incredible. I would highly recommend packing cubes to everyone, just especially when you're in a place for a day. You can just pull out a cube, unzip it. You don't have to dig through your whole bag or let it get to a mess. And so I use those, and you have used those pretty religiously since I got them 2.5 years ago or so. I got them once I had started remote year. Let's see.
What about any
Gear-wise?
hacks that you've learned in retrospect that you're like, oh, I wish I would have known this in the beginning? Like, what?
Well, so I used to have, I've been getting as much merino wool as possible now, and merino wool is just that for clothing. It's for underwear, for shirts. It's the best anti-smell, anti bacterial feeling. It's stuff that I love it for like a travel shirt. When you're on a long plane ride, 12-hour plane ride, and you're wearing a shirt and you like get off the plane, you feel like you need a shower. You feel like your clothes are dirty. There's just something about it. But I swear, like the merino wool clothing, it makes it all feel like go away. It always feels clean no matter what.
Yeah.
And then a month in Croatia, we didn't have really good access to laundry. And so, it was super hot in Croatia when we were there. It was, 95 degrees out. So I was sweating through all my clothes. So I started to hand wash a lot of my clothes. And when you're on the road, uh, not necessarily needing access to a washer machine is hugely valuable. So I started to get, small packs of detergent. And when I shower, I basically shower in my clothing that I'm wearing. If it needs to be washed, if the shirt needs to be washed, my underwear, my athletic clothes, I basically shower in it, take it off, wash it all right then, wring it out, and then hang it up. And I'll do that, 5 times per piece of clothing before I'll think that it feels fine, but I'll eventually bring it to a real washer. And with that method, I'm able to get away with maybe 3 pairs of underwear. I know that sounds disgusting, but I mean, it's no joke. I can get away with 3 pairs of underwear, 2 pairs of socks, and it's all merino, so merino underwear, merino socks. And I mean, that's hugely beneficial. Both, I always have like clean clothes. I don't have to go to the laundromat nearly as often. I probably go every 2 weeks still, but not with that much stuff, and I only do carry on, so I don't have that much clothing at all.
Yeah, this is
I know
like I thought I had my footprint down. I'm now down to like 1 piece of checked luggage, and you're just like next level. Like, nope, I'm taking showers in my clothes.
I mean, it's when there was a need, I started doing it, and I'd never thought of washing my clothes like that before. But as soon as I started to, it was just like, oh no, I don't need to go to a washer, and all my clothes are clean all the time. So that's nice.
Yeah,
takes 2 more minutes. So, yeah,
that's a great hack. Actually the gal who was the program leader for the last remote year group that was in Lisbon, the Excelsior group, Catherine Beach, was telling me about this method. I forget what she called it. She's Aussie, and she's talking about, oh yeah, you just take a shower in your clothes. Never heard of that before.
Yeah,
really cool. Okay, so here's a question I've always had. And I had a brush with this. Like, now I have the remote year community again, being that I'm in Lisbon, and there's, this is one of their main hubs. So there's constantly cycling through a group. So I have that kind of community again. When you left remote year and you're now solo traveling, did you find it hard to meet people, or was there like any loneliness involved in that, or how have you coped with that, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, remote year's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, post remote year, I've traveled probably the next 2.5 months after the program finished with people from remote year. So various trips. We were mostly in Mexico, and Canada, and New York. Very short trip in New York, but it's just basically it was very easy to just say when the program was finishing, I had like, hey, we're like, you want to go to Mexico? You want to go to, Sayulita? You want to go to Mexico City? Should we do a trip to Canada where so-and-so lives? And, you have, all of a sudden you have these immense amount of people that you're friends with that are still traveling or want to travel or just around the world. So you're able to connect to them, to stay with them, and travel with them. I mean, I did that for the first 2 months of this year also. But by the time that fall came around September of 2016, I had gone about 15 months of traveling without spending any time by myself. And so this was like the first foray into solo travel for myself. It was actually, I spent about 3 weeks in Montreal, not meeting anyone. I had spent so much time with so many people that I like kind of shut myself off on purpose, and like worked a lot. Got really into, I had joined like a yoga studio up there. So I met people at the yoga studio, but I wasn't really active at the time. And I kind of had a time of like reflection and meditation and writing. And it was funny how necessary it seemed, and in hindsight, that I had spent so much time with people all the time for 15 months. And then after that, I started doing a mix. So I'll travel with a few friends here and there. And then I'll do a trip on my own. And depending on how long I've been traveling with other people, where I am, I'll mix it up between being super social. That's kind of my default. Almost always down for anything as long as I'm done with work and got my exercise in. And and then also had these times similar to Montreal where I kind of just want to, spend time working on myself, doing deep dives into what I want to be doing the next year. So this past fall in Morocco, I was with a lot of people that I'm good friends with now, at a great co-working space in Tagazout. But it was a time I wanted to spend kind of in reflection and quiet for myself, not really doing too much social. But it's pretty amazing that the amount of people that I've met in the places that I do frequent, here in Bali, especially. And I'm technically I'm not living with anyone now or travel with anyone here, but I've seen and met I don't know 10, 15 people from a remote year, not my program, but that had just friends that had just come through, people that I've met, friends of friends that way. And then there's so many digital nomads here that so many communities you can meet people. I mean, through co-working spaces, there's always co-working space events. Right now there's the digital nomad, or they call it the Dojo 80s Computer Club event is going on. They had a developer meetup last night. So co-working spaces are great ways to meet people on the road. And then the one thing I do love about CrossFit is they're always good communities. So I always meet people at the gyms I go to. They're always healthy people that are also usually looking to have a good time, active, people.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think this is probably a good time to wrap up, but I want to ask one more question. So my buddy had this blog that was called Bad Decisions Make Good Stories. And tell me, was there any good story or a bad decision that you're willing to share on the road?
I'm really bad at this kind of recall, but let's see. I'm sure there were many bad decisions. I know. So these hikes that I like to go on, when I was in remote year, I would usually invite whoever I thought was like capable of doing a hike. And there was one when we were in Vietnam, and I went through the process of what's the tallest mountain in Vietnam, and it's called Mount Fancy Pen. It's like Fansipan, and it's in the Sapa Valley region, which is a really beautiful region in northern Vietnam. And I got a crew of our group, about 12 or 13 of us together, to go climb up there. And I booked through a shady looking website. It was really cheap, maybe $100 a person for like 2 nights, 2 days climbing, all meals included. And I didn't read the fine print. I thought it was, if we brought jackets, we were fine. So we spent a day of hiking up through the mountain, which was really beautiful. And we got to the place we were going to stay that night. And upon arrival, the sun's setting, it's starting to get cold. We're maybe 12,000 feet up, 10,000 feet up. And they show us to where we're supposed to stay that night, and they open the door. There's a wooden platform that could fit about maybe 12 people, like if you're literally sardines next to each other. And there's no blankets, there's no sleeping bags, there's no pillows. That was not included in the trip. And so as the temperature is dropping and we're getting colder and colder as the night's going on, and there's no room and no comfort, I had brought this high level of misery on everyone. We spent I think 12 hours, ended up spending 12 hours in this room from 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. to 5 a.m. Trying to just wait out the cold until it got warm enough so that we could go summit the mountain and then get off this thing. And that was it was maybe the most miserable night of sleep for all of us that we've ever had. I mean, most people didn't even sleep. You're just freezing cold. You're not comfortable at all. You're packed in, and you have to be packed in to get any warmth. But at the same time, it's not comfortable. It was brutal. And everyone's trying to be as chipper about it and non-negative as possible, but it was really hard to be. So that was one of the. It was I was kind of organized the thing. So luckily they didn't say anything to my face about telling me to F off or anything. But I'm sure they all thought it. So we all look back on that fondly now. But it was probably the worst night of sleep of many of our lives. So
that sounds like what Trish calls level 3 fun. That's
exactly, yeah.
Maybe the origin of level 3 fun there.
Yeah, we had this when we were sitting around in misery. We had snake wine, which they have in Vietnam. They they do, like marinate snakes in the liquor. And it was maybe the worst tasting liquor that I've ever had, just absolutely brutal. But when you're in conditions like that, you're just like, well, I'm going to sip it anyways, because it can only get better than what's going on here. I'll just, hold my nose and down it. But yeah.
Nice.
Level 3 fun.
Cool. Well, Trevor, I think we'll probably wrap it there. Question for you. So I am not going to promise anything, but I'm going to try to make it so people can actually submit questions, video questions. And I don't know if you're open to maybe a follow-up thing, maybe a month or two down the road. But if we get enough video questions and people want to ask you questions, are you game maybe to do like a follow-up episode?
Sure. Yeah. That'd be cool.
Cool.
Yeah, man.
Awesome. Any parting thoughts for someone who's actually listened this far and still listening to us and considering doing the remote nomading thing?
Yeah. I mean, if you're capable, like I was, really take a look, because I just didn't give it enough of a look, and luckily remote year was there as an impetus, and really try to see if it can fit for you, and taking at least, a 3-month, 6-month trial of it could be game changing, could be life changing for you. So I say remote year was the best year of my life, and since then it's pretty much it's been the same, better. So
nice. All right, man. Thank you so much for spending the time. Come back to Lisbon. Let's go kite surfing soon.
Yeah, man.
All
Definitely.
Right. All right. Take care,
man. Bye.
See you. All right, that was my interview with Trevor Gerhardt. If you have any questions for Trevor, you can leave them in a comment. If you're considering doing remote year or a program like it, you can get up to $300 off select programs, but simply by applying through our referral link. You can do that in the footer. Just go to nomadpodcast.com/discounts. Note, if you do apply direct to the programs, it nullifies your eligibility for that. So make sure to apply via our referral form. Nomad Podcast is supported in part by Nomad Prep, an online academy that teaches you everything you need to know about taking your job on the road so you can crush it abroad. Enroll today at nomadprep.com/podcast and get your first 4 days of training completely free. Nomad Prep, take your job on the road and take on the world. Lastly, if you haven't already done so, add your email at the bottom of Nomad Podcast, and we'll send you a notification as future episodes are released. And next week we have Paige Susi talking to us. She's going to tell us about her adventures in building a startup while traveling the world. Until next time, it's a big world out there. Get out there and explore it. I'll see you on the road.
Nomad.